So we're doing two things in this panel. This last session, we want to talk about something called the Colorado Energy Research Collaboratory, describe what it is, and describe how it could be a resource for you if you decide to go forward with an RPE project. And then we're going to just open it up for any questions you have about RPE. So I've asked Ryan if he would just describe what the Colorado Energy Research Collaboratory is, and welcome Bob to jump in.
Yeah, hi. I'm Ryan Richards. I'm Associate Vice President for Research at the Colorado School of Mines. I've been our representative to the Collaboratory for, I don't know, the last year or so. So I'll say a few remarks and I'll let Bob follow up on that. But basically, we have the three Colorado research universities, Mines, CU, CSU, and NREL, and we have a vice president for research and a liaison as the representatives there. And we've been doing a number of things to try to spur additional sort of cross-institutional research in the areas of energy. And a couple of weeks ago, we gave out a series of seed grants for projects that required at least two of the institutions to be represented there. Some of those were targeted towards ultimate ARPA-E submissions. Some were towards other types of centers, different types of grants. So keep an eye out for those. We put out solicitations for those about once a year or so, looking to spur different activities. Just this morning, prior to this meeting, we had a meeting with an industrial advisory committee that we've just put together. And so there, the two things that we're really looking to address are, we had a meeting with Hickenlooper's office, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, where we were really trying to engage industry and see how the research enterprise in Colorado could interact better with Colorado industry, and we're in the process. This morning was our first meeting with them. It was an incredible group of people, and so we're trying to build on that. And we're also trying to figure out how we can best develop the workforce in Colorado. So how we can maybe adapt our academic programs or our research thrusts to best synergize with the Colorado industry. I don't know, do you have something to add to that, Bob?
No, I can talk about the Collaboratory, or its structure and such.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so just a little bit of history, and actually Mari knows all of these details very, very well. She helped pull all of it together, but I believe the Collaboratory was formed back in 2008, and the initial grant from the state, Mari, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the initial award, or over time, the accumulated investment from the state of Colorado was in the realm of $9 million. And $8 million of that has been expended, or roughly.
It's $10 million and we have about 1.5.
Okay, but so we have some dollars left. So to Ryan's point, there are still opportunities where the Collaboratory can assist with match. But if we back up and talk about some of the Collaboratory's successes, which Mari and others are rightfully very proud of, the Collaboratory expended about $8 million of state money. And that ended up attracting $95 million in basically mostly federal, but also federal and industry research sponsorship. And then last year, the Collaboratory conducted a economic impact analysis and looked out to see what was the impact on the state's economy of that $95 million worth of sponsored research and development. And the conclusion by the people from the business school and the economists who did the analysis was that it had an economic impact on the state of $195 million additionally on top of the $95 million spent on attracted research. So we're fortunate, and part of our discussion this morning that we had with our industry colleagues that were visiting, and many of them are still here in the audience. Thanks for spending the day with us. But some of the discussion was around, all right, what do we do next? And as Mari pointed out, we have still in the Collaboratory coffers nearly $1.5 million that can be available to be used as match, on attracting federal awards. There's also potentially an opportunity to do a little bit of seed activity to try to make some preliminary measurements or try to stimulate some technology development that would put us and put our researchers and our industry partners in a more competitive position to go after ARPA-E and other funding. So, Maury, did you want to add anything?
So, I think the Collaboratory is really unique. As Terry mentioned this morning, Colorado's #3 in ARPA-E awards, and so you've got the California, primarily the Bay Area. We don't have the direct access to capital and the number of institutions that they have in that area, or similarly in the Boston area. But we've got 4 great institutions, and we have one thing that they don't have at the other, on the coasts, and that is a true spirit of collaboration. We didn't really have that in 2008 when the Collaboratory started, and it was launched by Senator
Salazar.
Salazar,
Secretary
who basically said, why aren't our institutions working more together? And, it took a while to figure out how to work together, but the mechanism essentially was that you had to have partners from different institutions in order to be able to get funding from the Collaboratory. This is probably the area that the three universities work most closely on. And having the opportunity at ARPA-E to go visit a lot of universities, this is not something you see other places. The California schools don't work with each other. The Texas schools don't work with each other. And so we've recognized that we are a pretty complete ecosystem if you take the 3 universities and NREL. And now we're taking the next steps to broaden and engage industry partners more effectively on that.
And we have tried to go after some of these hub regional types of.
Yeah, I was going to mention the regional summit we had in September of last year, here in this room actually, started that discussion about forming and banding together with the other states. And we have Utah here, Wyoming's been involved with us before, and Montana and Oklahoma. Is anybody from Oklahoma? Oklahoma State? Thanks for being here. Utah. And so it's not just Colorado. We feel as if there's plenty to go around.
So just something to keep in mind, if you're going for an ARPA-E proposal, and if it works that there are strengths across institutions, you can think that, I would urge you to talk to your institutional representative to see if that would be eligible to have ARPA-E help with the cost share match. So you can either talk to your vice president, Collaboratory, and so you can either talk to your vice president of research or your liaison. So that'd be me at CSU, Ryan at Mines, and Bob at CU. And maybe the last thing I'd suggest is that if you are thinking about going for an ARPA-E proposal, even if it's not through the Collaboratory, and you think that some modest investment would get you to a point that your proposal would be more collaborative, I would urge you to talk to your institution to see if they would be willing to put some funds in to help you put together a more competitive proposal. I can't speak for anyone, but I know that we have done that at CSU, and if you can make a very credible case that a modest investment would give you a sort of a step change in competitiveness, we're very interested in discussing on that.
Can I ask you a question, Brian? So I asked Howard earlier, but remind me, what is the cost share requirement, if any, on the ARPA-E submissions?
It does change, but I believe for industry, for large industry, it's 20%. For universities, it's I think it's now gone to 5%. So it's not that big of a hurdle, and then it's sort of blended. It's sort of blended if you've got different size partners, depending on how the monies goes out.
And if you're a startup, I think you can have it waived for the first year and pay double later on if you survive. And that's about 10%, I think, for small businesses. But you should look in the FOA, because Brian doesn't seem too much more confident than I am about the exact numbers. Look at any of the recent FOAs, Google search on cost share, and read the rules.
And it was mentioned about the Industry Advisory Committee that's being formed. There's some industry people in here. How can they get involved?
Well, the ideal ARPA-E project would have great science, a big idea, and a team that can credibly get it to scale. And having partners that you can hand off to is really is a real advantage on a proposal. But as Howard mentioned, it's got to be a real partnership and not not just a checking off the box. Anything else you want to add on that? So I think at this point, I would just propose that we've talked a lot today, and we've kind of the proposals have kind of filled up the time. I just want to we want to open up at this point to any questions you may have about ARPA-E, and then we will. We've got refreshments upstairs, some adult beverages, I believe, and kind of the goal of one of the things we'd like to do today is. We are encouraging interdisciplinary, multi-institution projects, and that's sort of an opportunity to mingle, meet some other folks. And I think Maury has some ideas on maybe how to do some social engineering to improve that engagement.
Well, no, not there, not upstairs, but I will send you all this information, and then I'd love to hear from you.
So I'd like to just follow up on your statement about multi-institution collaborations. NREL currently is involved in 19 active ARPA-E projects. We lead 5, and we're partners on 14. And on every single one of them, we're partnered with multiple outside organizations. So we can't be successful at ARPA-E proposals without collaborating, and we're happy to collaborate with people where appropriate.
Other questions? There's got to be more questions. I saw hands before.
One in the very in the back.
No? Oh, there's a hand.
So follow up with the question of collaborative across institutions. So does ARPA-E have some preference? For example, I may have a similar team at CU Boulder, for example. Should I try to reach out to them, or should I try to reach out to a similar team in another institution, for example, CSU?
I don't think we necessarily care between, if there's 2 institutions, we look at the individual scientists, and there is, I guess, there probably is some preference for having, or if you just look statistically, I suspect that multi-institutional projects are more common than single institutions. I'll let Howard weigh in on his recollection of that. But I will say that, John showed his org chart that sort of looked like the Boulder phone directory. If you get to more than 4 or 5 4 institutions, it starts to raise questions about just project management, because there is some significant overhead on, and there's that much more potential for inter-team conflicts. And I will say that if you've got a whole bunch of people, you really want to be able to make the case of what specifically is each one doing, and how are you going to manage that herd of cats?
Yeah, I agree with all of what Brian said. And I think if I think about when I'm judging them, I'm looking for the best science team possible. I want to know that there's real experts approaching the thermal management or the development of thinking about eventual manufacturing. I want to make sure there's someone on the team who really knows that. On the other hand, if the best person is geographically proximate, I mean, I know the difference when I dropped in on my teams and there was and they were meeting in person every 2 weeks. Instead of just having the person from California and the person from Illinois in the meeting every quarter, it gave me a better feeling about the team, and I think it gave better results. So having someone in the same institution is good. There's less friction in the wheels whenever you want to make a change to the budget or the scope. You're probably going to get an amicable settlement because the dean will come in and mediate between the two professors that are having trouble, splitting the new pie, whether it's bigger or smaller. And if they're in, faraway places, all that stuff is a little harder. So I actually would say, all things being equal, take the equal scientist in the same institution or the same state. But if it's not equal, take the best one.
If I could add a little bit to that. So just in general, I think you heard from Howard and from Brian this morning, and also from Alan Rudolph earlier today as he was discussing DARPA and his own experiences with ARPA-E, that these institutions, these DARPAs, these ARPA-Es, they're apolitical. I mean, that's one of the nice things, and one of the motivations behind it was, how do we get good science to happen? And so, I think first and foremost, and basically this is inherent in both of the comments that preceded, get the best team. Get the team together that can optimize the results and the impact. And I think ARPA-E will respond to that. So that's, that should help with the decision making on who to bring in. So who's excellent, who can you work with, what makes the best team, what will result in the biggest impact.
And I'll just follow up on that geographical piece. On some large DOE or NSF projects, you are looking for geographic diversity to try to pick up different congressional districts. ARPA-E has no consideration for that.
Hi, yeah, this piggybacks on what you're talking about here in terms of geographies. I'm with a startup company in a distributed team, and we're distributed throughout the West and distributed internationally as well. And we're taking US technology and doing a project deployment in Canada, and we have teams, subject matter experts in the UK and different parts of the world. Does ARPA-E lend itself toward technology development? And by the way, also with the Colorado Collaboratory institutions as well, we have connections with. Is for that type of thing in terms of deploying and we're talking about a project probably deployed internationally first, and then developing an R&D capability to further advance project deployments. Does ARPA-E lend itself toward that type of scenario, or is it more domestically oriented, either from the science side or from the project commercialization side?
Yeah, I'll start with the deployment question. I mean, it's specifically banned in every FOA I've ever seen. I think it's banned in ARPA-E's enabling language. ARPA-E does not support deployment of existing technologies. It's a technology development agency, so you won't get money, whether it's domestic or international deployment. We're generally aimed at first prototype with the plans for the company, the plans for the deployment. So what you're developing is the first prototype of most things, right? And primitive it may be, or maybe more advanced. And the question of international, You are permitted to have an international partner on the R&D work, but you have to be able to argue why they are unique in their capabilities much more strongly than you would have to argue, for a Colorado institution or, for that matter, a California one. If it's going to be a German organization or you need to buy some particular piece of equipment that's only available in Germany, that's fine. It shouldn't be too big a fraction of your proposal. You might run into some headaches. But if they're unique, they're the only ones that can do it, go for it.
It's much easier if they're a vendor than a subcontractor, because the RPE was meant to fund innovation in the U.S. Now but you have to argue what's a U.S. company. If you look at a GE, they're global. If you look at a Samsung or Panasonic, they have significant R&D facilities and staff in the U.S. So it's very easy to fund. I think you had Samsung, didn't you? Or but it's much easier.
We had Sharp Labs, yeah.
It would be much easier to fund a Sharp Labs in the U.S. than to send money to Sharp in Japan.
And then Japan shut down Sharp Labs in the United States before the project was done, but we don't have to.
That's helpful. Thanks.
Any other questions? Here's one.
So I cannot remember if it was a RPE or it was a BTO, a Building Technologies Office proposal, but it was also a big one, 3 years, a couple of $1 million proposal, and I was a PI on that. I'm junior faculty from School of Mines, and then one of the first comments we got back from the reviewers was the PI is a junior faculty with only a couple of years of experience. Can you comment on that? Should I repeat my question?
Yeah, he's a faculty within a couple.
No.
He says that the PI or the main PI is a junior faculty with a couple of years of experience. So I don't know. Can you comment on that?
Greg Riker is. I don't know how long Greg had only been there. 1 year. Yeah. So it was great science, but we're really age agnostic. But you do look at it to understand how they. Someone will always say, will they be able to manage this with the tenure process? But on the other hand, if you get a really famous senior person on there, there's a tendency to say, we've got, John Goodenough or something, my battery proposal, and you have to say, is that person really going to be engaged? So that's really our question: can they do the work, and are they going to be engaged? And are they going to show up at the meetings?
Okay.
I saw my colleagues on the Open that I worked on in 2012 really receptive to young faculty. Most of them thought they were hungry. And you could have gotten that rebuttal letter from RPE because one of the reviewers says it. That doesn't mean that's the opinion of RPE. Okay. I think that there's no big prejudice either direction. They got your pros and cons. You're old and wise, you're young and hungry,
Thanks.
I think I saw a question over here. Because I was imagining that. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Yeah.
So today you focused mostly on universities and large businesses. Could you talk some more about how small businesses can crack this nut? There was a little bit up there about partnering with a university, but small businesses with big ideas.
So I'll actually say that from my some more. Really, I'd say if we had favorites, if we look at our stories, small businesses are really probably the most effective groups that we fund because they are they're hungry, and if you develop the project, there's a direct path. A challenge is that there is an administrative burden. So you've got to make sure that you've got a structure in place to do all the reports and meet the administrative burden, but we pay for that. So in some cases, there's a little bit of a awkwardness at first while staff are at it, maybe to bring up to speed to handle some of the administrative paperwork. The reason for this panel, because as we conceived it within the Collaboratory, we want to make sure that the universities are well equipped to propose. But RPE loves small businesses, and so.
Yeah, and I think my slide emphasized that if you are a small business, there'll be a little bit of level of skepticism. So either be really clear in the proposal, we have the equipment and the personnel specifically. We have one of these, we have one of these, we have one of these. We have an established relationship with a vendor around this. And we are giving $100,000 to this university team who has this particular expertise and the spectrometer that we're missing. So just know that you're going to be encountering potentially a little bit of skepticism in the same way that I said, the universities and the national labs may face I agree with Brian, they face higher barriers of skepticism that they better address. But you better address yours too if you're a small business, and that is, can they really handle it? Can they pull it off?
A challenge small businesses have is writing well-crafted proposals. Just because universities have teams to help you, NREL has a team to help you with the RPE proposals. Large corporations do. So but at a small business, you're doing everything. So it's not we love great proposals, and there is a little bit of discounting of the slickness of the proposal, but that's a real challenge you face.
That is a challenge. So get help where you need it, because when you see, I'll give an example, a GE proposal. I mean, it's Tolstoy. Like you just and it is hard to compete with that. But I think there's a favoritism because people think if GE does it, is it going to go anywhere? So.
I have this question specific to, I'm sorry, right here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, did you have a follow-up to this?
I had a follow-up
Yeah.
small business question. At least for some FOAs, RPE releases an SBIRSTTR specific version.
Yes.
Is that a separate competition, or is it just slightly separate rules for chasing the same big pot of money?
It has worked both ways. We've had projects where we identified it before as an SBIR, and that just meant there was a separate pool of funds that had to go to small businesses. We've had other cases where, I can think in the GenSets program, we went in after the fact and said, there was actually a lot of great concepts from small businesses that didn't make it through. So we're going to open up some additional funds for small business through the SBIR program.
So right here. So
Yeah.
I have a very specific question related to the proposal writing in the part of the schedule. So when you have the schedule in the Gantt chart, I actually received one comment feedback from the reviewer say that the Gantt chart that I put down is so coarse. It's not specific, and he actually literally put down the wording of like, this schedule has to be in detail up to down to the day and weeks, rather than several weeks and a couple of months in terms of tasks that I need to detail. So can you comment on that of the feedback?
It varies by program director. I look at it to make sure they've got the major elements there, but and that you understand a logical workflow. But I'm pretty sure that we're going to be engaged in renegotiating that anyway. So I don't get too tied up in looking on whether getting this done in week 17 versus 19 is on the chart. I don't know how you manage that.
Yeah, we're renegotiating anyway, so it doesn't matter to me. That probably came from one of the reviewers, who probably came out of some other agency.
But if we just see a skeleton summary that doesn't look like you've put a lot of effort into it, then we're going to question whether you're going to put in the work.
Right, if you haven't touched tech to market at all, if you're, don't have any thought at all to system integration, you haven't thought about thermal expansion coefficient mismatch, and you're going to raise the temperatures, the key things should be in there, and then we're going to sit down together and try to make sure we get it right. I want to just stress one other point. It was from the panel, if I can cut in for a second. Several people mentioned they were funded as seedlings. In the old days, ARPA had a separate section of the Open FOA for seedlings. That no longer exists. Some of the programs do specify seedlings so you'll have to read the Open FOA to see what the rules are. Don't assume that you can put in say, I want 1 year, $1 million, and then get more money later. Some program directors have structured their programs that way, others haven't. So know that just because several of the people on this panel happen to have seedlings that got extended, don't assume you can do that. Read the rule book.
So just a follow-up curiosity question on this, the reviewer comment stuff, because there's been a couple questions. Does ARPA-E provide every single reviewer comment to you, or is there some editorial prior to that? So if there's these wacky, obviously off-base reviewer comments, are they stripped, or do we get everything?
There's some cleanup.
I stripped them. I don't think it's obligatory, so I don't think there's a rule. It's up. The program director, the ARPA is built to have a lot of program director autonomy. If it was off the wall and I really didn't care about it, why would I leave it there? Because they're less likely to answer my question.
And I'll just, on the comments, if you get a lot of, actually, I think I'm going to back off on the question because Howard's already addressed that. So, anything else? All right. Well, thank you for coming out, taking the time to think about RPE projects. We would want to continue the trajectory of building the strength of the energy ecosystem in Colorado, and RPE is a great tool in the toolbox for that. Watch for future funding announcements. Work with your institutions. If you're industry and want to partner with institutions, we're all interested in that. And if you are interested in having a conversation around potentially being program director, tech to market fellow, make use of your resources. Howard and I would be happy to talk to you. And with that, I'm turning it over to Maury to see.
And I'd just like to emphasize for the CU folks that I don't think Bob is my employer, it's Racy, and I'm not just working on RPE proposals with people. We're thinking about NSF and DARPA and BES, so you can access my help in thinking about the approach to those agencies as well.
Great, thanks, Howard.
Please thank Racy.